About 6 months ago, I got a hold of a whole bunch of pecan lumber, and included sort of as an afterthought in that were two American chestnut slabs. One of them you can see here I'm milling down. They sat in the shop for that whole time, just waiting on the right project, and the other day I thought, maybe I'll just build a console table out of them. Since they were both slabs, I had to mill all of the pieces for the final project out of those individual larger slabs. Here you can see I'm joining one of the pieces before taking it over to the planer to start surfacing one side of it. The planer that I have is a 20-inch ply helical head made by Woodtech. It's probably 20 plus years old, but it still does pretty well. My shop doesn't have three-phase in it, so one of the things I have to deal with is running variable frequency drives. Before pulling it actually over to the table saw, I went ahead and squared off one end. And then I'm measuring the length of my skirt. I think it was about 56.5 inches. The goal is to cut this to the right size and then go back through and rip the boards both widthwise and then vertically through it to end up with my final size pieces. My miter saw has a little bit of an issue in that the guard doesn't stay up by itself, so you can see me having to hold it out of the way. At least it does retract by itself and keep the blade covered. Here we are over at the table saw. I'm going to rip these down to 2 inches to establish the width of my skirt board. And then after I've gone ahead and done that, I'm going to rip them again to 3/4 of an inch thick to get 2 skirt boards out of each of those individual 2-inch rips. The purpose of that is, since I don't have any dimensional lumber for this project, I'm having to make all of my own. And I typically make my skirt boards about 2 inches tall. The purpose is to not overwhelm the piece. I want to be about the same thickness as my top. At the top I actually milled and sanded and then finished off screen before I decided to make a video of this project. So you'll see that come in a little later as we get through this. I ended up making 4 individual skirt pieces of the same dimension, but you'll see later on how I went and cut some of those back down. I didn't end up needing 4 of the 4 full-length skirt boards. Now that I have those skirt or apron pieces put together, I'm going back to the original slab and cutting pieces about 30 inches long, rough length, to do the legs for the piece. The overall height's going to be 30 inches at the end, which means that these legs are going to need to be about 28 since the top is right at 2 inches thick. I'll end up fine-tuning that as I go along just to make sure that the thing sits flat as a final project and that it doesn't feel too tall or too short. This ends up being the most time-consuming part of the project. If you buy something from a lumber yard that's, say, S3S already, smooth 3 sides, you don't have to do any of this and you can cut down your final length to begin with. But since American chestnut is in short supply where I live, and I can't just go down to my local lumber store and pick up any more of it, I have to go through this process for first my skirt boards and then now my legs. And you can see this piece has a little bit of a crack in it, which ended up being a problem as we moved forward. I was only able to actually get 3 legs out of this and had to go back through the process one more time for my 4th leg out of a smaller scrap piece. One of the legs actually just fell apart as it came off the table saw. Here I am doing a trick that I learned from Laura Kampf, actually, where she tapes all of the pieces together that she's trying to bring to the same size, and then you can take one end off to get them all flushed up, and then when you flip the board over, you're able to make your measurement and cut all 4 pieces flush on the other side. This process is just checking to make sure that my width is right. I already have an established dimension in what I know the top is going to be. So I have to make sure that the skirt plus the legs isn't wider than the final dimension on what the top is. If we end up in that kind of an issue, all I have to do is cut the skirt board down at this point. If I do any of my final assembly before checking to make sure that I'm too wide, then it causes real problems. I have done that in the past, and it's a bit of a pain trying to go back and fix it once you've done that. I was pretty comfortable with where the dimensions were at this point, so I went ahead and started cutting the shorter of the two sides to make my shorter skirt pieces. These ended up right at about 9 inches. Here you see I'm putting 45s on a few pieces. We're going to cut them 45 one side and then 45 the other, and they'll go in the corners. So the skirt, or apron as some people call it, will be its own assembly that will then get attached to the underside of the tabletop. So here I'm just marking it out. My goal is to be precise or really just consistent with these. As long as they're all about the same length, the legs are interchangeable, and that's what we're going with. It makes assembly a whole lot easier if it doesn't matter which leg goes where. Here you can see I'm just cutting 4 of these down. I won't show all of it, but just enough to give you an idea. This is where final assembly begins on a piece. This is where all of the ideas and all the measurements come together, and we find out whether this piece is going to be successful or not. We're not just looking for all the pieces to fit together, but the design also needs to work right. A piece can feel right as you're building it, and once you get to the end it can look pretty terrible, or the function that you were going for doesn't match the look of the piece or where the piece is going to fit. You can use a slab like this to build a console table and find out at the end that it would have worked out better as a bench. Right here, all I'm doing is marking the location of the screw holes. This is how we'll fasten the legs of this to the base. What I'm using are just some 3.5-inch screws that I had around the shop. As long as I mark all of the holes even, then the legs should be interchangeable. You definitely want to drill pilot holes in something as soft as American chestnut. Driving a 3.5-inch screw down into the leg without one is pretty much guaranteed to snap it. But with that done, the assembly was pretty straightforward. I was able to put all 4 of the legs on without much hassle involved. The screws drove in pretty well. The hardest part was just keeping the leg in place while I drove the screw into the existing pilot hole. Once I was confident with how everything fit, I went ahead and took the legs back off the skirt since it made it a lot easier to finish. I used one of the simpler finishes, just a simple Minwax polyurethane and clear satin. I like what it does to American chestnut. It gives it a little bit of a darker look and provides a decent amount of protection without changing the look of the wood too much. And here's the finished product. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for future videos.